She can't even keep a houseplant alive, Your Honor. You really expect me to believe she can raise 2 children? My ex-husband adjusted his cufflinks as the courtroom let out a low murmur. His mother, perched in the front row like a bird of prey, nodded approvingly. His sister dabbed at invisible tears. Even his golf buddy from the Granite Club had shown up, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at him. I looked at the clock on the wall above Judge Faulkner's head. 11 minutes. That was all the time my ex-husband had left before his entire performance became evidence at his own sentencing hearing. Be honest with me. Have you ever sat across from someone who knows exactly what they did to you and watched them smile while they rewrote the story? Drop a yes in the comments if you've been there. I need to know I'm not the only one who survived this. My ex-husband, I'll call him Gavin because that's his name and he deserves every syllable of it, sat back down next to his lawyer, a woman named Cheryl with a tight bun and tighter ethics. Gavin crossed his legs, bouncing his Italian loafer like he was waiting for a latte at his favorite Yorkville cafe, not fighting for custody of our 2 daughters. He whispered something to Cheryl and she nodded without looking up from her notes. The gallery was full. His side of the family had come out in force. His mother, Diane, who once told me at Thanksgiving dinner that I was lucky, Gavin chose someone without a pedigree. His sister, Tanya, who had forwarded my private text to Gavin during our separation because family sticks together. His cousin Brett, who had co-signed the lease on the apartment, Gavin moved his girlfriend into 3 weeks after I found out about her. Not a single person on those benches was there for me. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Miss Lawson, Judge Faulkner said, peering at me over his reading glasses. Your ex-husband has raised some serious concerns about your living situation and your capacity to provide a stable environment for your children. I'd like to hear your response. Gavin leaned forward. He wanted me to cry. He needed me to raise my voice so he could glance at the judge with that rehearsed look of concern he'd been perfecting since our first marriage counseling session. The one where he told the therapist I was emotionally volatile while I sat there with a bruise on my wrist hidden under a cardigan. That was how Gavin operated. He didn't hit you with a fist. He hit you with a narrative. He'd spend months telling everyone you were unstable, and then when you finally reacted to something genuinely cruel, he'd point at you and say, "See? This is what I'm talking about." In psychology, they call it reactive abuse. You push someone until they snap. Then you use the snap as proof they're broken. But I had stopped snapping 18 months ago. Not because I healed, that came later, but because I realized something that changed everything. Every time I reacted, Gavin won. Every time I stayed silent, Gavin panicked. Silence was the one currency he couldn't counterfeit. So I gave him nothing. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my blazer, the same blazer I'd bought at Value Village for $12, the one Gavin had mocked in his affidavit as evidence of my financial instability. "I'm listening, Your Honor," I said. "I just want to make sure my ex-husband has finished his opening remarks. I wouldn't want to interrupt." Gavin's jaw tightened. Just for a second. If you weren't watching for it, you'd miss it. But I had spent 7 years studying that jaw. I knew every tell. Cheryl, his lawyer, shifted in her seat. She was tapping her pen against her legal pad. I'd noticed that habit during the discovery phase. Cheryl tapped when she was nervous, and she had reason to be. She knew things Gavin didn't. She knew which financial disclosures they'd fudged to get this hearing fast-tracked. She just didn't know that I knew too. Let me take you back. 2 years before this hearing, I was living in a basement apartment in Scarborough with our 2 girls, sharing a bathroom with the upstairs tenant, heating soup on a hot plate because the stove didn't work. Gavin had frozen our joint accounts the day he filed for divorce. His lawyer sent a letter saying I was entitled to interim spousal support, which turned out to be $2,200 a month in a city where a 1-bedroom costs $2,100. He wanted me desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Desperate people sign things they shouldn't. Desperate people agree to custody arrangements just to make the pain stop. He drove past my apartment once, slowed down, looked at the window wells at street level, and texted me, "This is what happens when you don't appreciate what you had." He didn't know that the basement apartment was a choice. While Gavin was leasing a BMW X5 and buying bottle service at King West clubs to impress a 24-year-old named Sloan, I was building something invisible. Every time he called me pathetic, I transferred another $3,000 into a TFSA under my maiden name. Every time his mother texted me Bible verses about submission, I logged another entry in the spreadsheet I'd been keeping since the night I found the second phone. Gavin thought my boring data entry job at a Mississauga office was proof I had no ambition. What he didn't know was that I wasn't doing data entry. I was working as a forensic accountant contractor for a Bay Street firm that specialized in fraud detection. My job was literally to find where people hide money, and my ex-husband had been hiding money since before our wedding. He thought I took the TTC because I couldn't afford a car. In reality, I was using every spare dollar to pay a private investigator named Dale, who had been a forensic auditor with the CRA for 20 years before going private. Dale didn't come cheap, but Dale was thorough. She lives in a basement, Gavin continued, standing up again without being asked. She feeds the girls cereal for dinner. She can't hold down a real job. He turned to the gallery, gesturing at me like I was an exhibit. My children deserve stability. They deserve a home with a yard, a father who can provide, not a mother who's given up on life. I watched him perform. I had to admit, he was good at it. 7 years of marriage had taught him exactly how to weaponize sympathy. He could make a room full of strangers feel sorry for him in under 3 minutes. It was almost impressive, the way a con artist technique is impressive if you separate it from the damage it causes. Judge Faulkner looked at Gavin's lawyer. Miss Chen, do you have documentary evidence to support these claims? Cheryl stood up. She walked to the bench carrying a thick, manila envelope. She didn't look at me. She hadn't looked at me once since the hearing started. Your Honor, she said, her voice measured and professional. We are submitting financial records showing that Miss Lawson has been unable to manage even basic household expenses. We are also submitting evidence of erratic spending patterns, including several large, unexplained withdrawals from a joint investment account that was supposed to be held in trust for the children's education. Gavin couldn't help himself. He jumped in, pointing at me. She drained the RESP, Judge. $87,000 gone. Our daughter's university fund? And she can't explain where it went because she doesn't even know. She's either incompetent or she spent it on God knows what. A gasp from the gallery. Diane clutched her handbag. Tanya shook her head in theatrical disappointment. Brett leaned over to whisper to someone behind him. To them, $87,000 in an RESP was sacred. In Canadian families, you don't touch the children's education fund. It was the one thing that made me look genuinely terrible, even to people who might have otherwise been sympathetic. Gavin turned back to the judge, his voice dropping to that soft, concerned tone he used when he wanted to seem reasonable. I'm not trying to punish her, Your Honor. I'm trying to protect my children. If she can't account for $87,000 meant for their future, how can we trust her with their present? Judge Faulkner opened the envelope. He spent a long time reading. His face revealed nothing. Miss Lawson, he said finally, these records indicate a significant depletion of the Registered Education Savings Plan. The Canada Education Savings Grant contributions appear to have been withdrawn as well. Do you have an explanation? The room went silent. Gavin leaned back, arms crossed, the picture of righteous fatherhood. He was waiting for me to stammer. He was waiting for me to cry and say, I didn't know what happened. He was waiting to win. I stood up. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't look at my lawyer, a quiet man named Robert who hadn't said a word yet, which was by design. I picked up a single blue folder I'd placed on the table at the start of the hearing. I don't have an explanation, Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and even. I have a trail. I walked to the bench and placed the folder in front of Judge Faulkner. I didn't rush. I moved with the specific calm of someone who knows how the story ends because they wrote every chapter. My ex-husband is correct, I said, turning to face the gallery. The RESP was drained. $87,000, including the CESG matching funds. I watched every dollar leave that account. Gavin let out a short laugh. She admits it. She watched it happen and did nothing. This is exactly what I've been. I wasn't negligent, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his like a blade through paper. I was documenting. Judge Faulkner opened the folder. His eyebrows rose as he looked at the first page. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a forensic audit trail, color-coded and cross-referenced. Miss Lawson, the judge said, looking up, walk me through what I'm seeing. You are looking at the digital transaction records for every withdrawal from that RESP, I explained. Each one was initiated using online banking credentials that were only accessible from 2 IP addresses. The first is the shared family desktop that remained in my ex-husband's possession after our separation at 118 Rosedale Heights Drive, Toronto. The second is a mobile device registered to a phone number belonging to Sloane Mercier. The color drained from Gavin's face so fast it was like watching a screen go dark. That's fabricated, he said, half standing. She hacked my... And here, I continued, flipping to the next tab in the folder, are the CRA records showing that the RESP withdrawals triggered an educational assistance payment to a non-eligible beneficiary. The funds were deposited into a personal checking account at TD Canada Trust, branch 4772, held jointly by Gavin Arthur Whitfield and Sloane Elise Mercier. The gallery erupted. Diane's handbag slipped from her lap. Tanya's mouth fell open. Brett suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. I turned to Gavin. "You didn't just steal from me," I said. "You stole from your own children's education fund to bankroll your girlfriend's condo deposit in Liberty Village. I have the land transfer records. I have the mortgage pre-approval. I have the gift letter you forged using my name to explain the source of the down payment to the lender." Gavin grabbed Cheryl's arm. She pulled away from him. "But why?" Judge Faulkner said, his voice cutting through the noise. He raised his hand and the room fell silent. "If you knew the money was being stolen, Miss Lawson, why didn't you freeze the account or report it immediately? Why allow $87,000 to be taken?" This was the moment. "Because I needed it to be enough, Your Honor," I said. "If I'd stopped him at the first withdrawal $5,000, it would have been a family law matter. A slap on the wrist. An adjustment in the equalization payment. He would have paid it back over 12 months and been done." I looked directly at Gavin. I needed the pattern. I needed repeated, deliberate withdrawals from a registered account with government matching funds. Under Section 380 of the Criminal Code, fraud over $5,000 carries a maximum sentence of 14 years. But more importantly, because the RESP contained Canada Education Savings Grant funds, those are federal funds. Misappropriation of federal funds under the Financial Administration Act is a separate offense. I rested my hands on the table. I didn't just need him to steal. I needed him to steal enough, often enough, from the right kind of account to make it undeniable. 3 withdrawals could be a mistake. 17 withdrawals over 14 months, routed through a joint account with his affair partner, used as a down payment on a property while simultaneously claiming poverty in a custody proceeding that is a pattern of fraud. Gavin slumped. But then something shifted in his eyes. That cornered animal look. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "She authorized it," he said, his voice finding strength from somewhere desperate. "She's rewriting history because she's bitter about the divorce." He handed the paper to the court clerk, who passed it to Judge Faulkner. "That is a signed consent form," Gavin said, standing straighter now. "Dated 18 months ago. She agreed that I could manage the RESP as part of our interim separation agreement. She signed it. 2. She gave me permission." He turned to the gallery, arms spread. "She's not a victim. She's a scorned woman trying to weaponize our children's future." Cheryl sat up straighter, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "If that document held, there was no fraud. There was no theft. There was only an authorized transfer that I was now reframing out of spite." Judge Faulkner examined the document. He looked at me. "Miss Lawson, is this your signature?" I recognized it immediately. 18 months earlier, sitting in Cheryl's office during what was supposed to be a good faith mediation session. A stack of papers shoved across the table. Gavin saying, "Just sign. It's standard. Your lawyer can review it later." My lawyer wasn't present. Gavin had scheduled the meeting when he knew Robert was in court on another matter. I signed it without reading every clause. That was the mistake that started the war. But it was also the mistake that made me realize who I was really dealing with. "It appears to be my signature, Your Honor," I said. Gavin pounced. "See?" she consented. "This whole thing is—" "But that consent form," I continued, my voice steady, "authorized management of the RESP. It did not authorize withdrawals for non-educational purposes. It did not authorize the transfer of CESG funds to a non-eligible beneficiary. And it certainly did not authorize the use of those funds as a down payment on a condominium purchased jointly with a third party who is not a subscriber, beneficiary, or legal guardian of our children." I opened my bag and handed over a second folder. "However," I said, "that consent form is the least of my ex-husband's problems today." The room went very quiet. I turned to Gavin. "During your financial disclosure for this custody proceeding, you declared your annual income as $112,000. You claimed you could barely afford the current child support payments." I flipped to a page and held it up. "This is a copy of your corporate tax filing for Whitfield Consulting Group, obtained through a court-ordered production request that your lawyer fought for 3 months to block. Your company invoiced $642,000 last fiscal year. You paid yourself a salary of $112,000 and retained the rest inside the corporation, where it was used to pay your personal credit card bills, your car lease, your girlfriend's Equinox membership, and a trip to Turks and Caicos that you described in your affidavit as a business development retreat. Gavin's hands were shaking. But here's the part I want the court to understand, I said. I looked at Judge Faulkner. 8 months ago, after I discovered the RESP fraud, I reported it to the CRA's Informant Leads program. I also filed a complaint with the Ontario Securities Commission regarding undisclosed income in his sworn financial statement. And 6 weeks ago, I provided all of this documentation to the RCMP Integrated Financial Crime Unit. I reached into my folder one more time. I also want the court to know that as of last Tuesday, I completed the purchase of the mortgage note on 118 Rosedale Heights Drive. My ex-husband's current residence from the original lender, who was more than happy to sell the note at a discount given the 2 missed payments this year. I placed the document on the table and slid it toward Gavin. I own your house, Gavin. The house you told this court you needed so the girls would have stability. I also hold the commercial lease on the office, where Whitfield Consulting operates, which I purchased from the property management company last month. I stood up straight and looked at him. You came to this court to take custody of our children by calling me incompetent. You are leaving this court as my tenant. Gavin's face collapsed. Not his expression, his entire face. The architecture of his confidence just folded inward. He looked at Cheryl. Cheryl was already packing her briefcase. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Diane, in the gallery, had gone completely white. Tanya was crying real tears this time. Brett was already texting someone, probably his own lawyer. I slid a single piece of paper across the table to Gavin. This is a withdrawal of your custody petition, I said, and a written acknowledgement that you misrepresented your financial situation to this court. You sign this, and I give you 90 days to vacate the house and 60 days to find a new office. You refuse, and the RCMP proceeds with the file I handed them, which now includes perjury and a sworn affidavit. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system humming. Gavin stared at the paper. His hand reached for the pen. It hovered there. You'll always be nothing without me, he whispered, quiet enough that only I could hear. I leaned in, just as quiet. I was nothing with you. That's the difference. He signed. The pen scratched against the paper like a nail on glass. He shoved the document back toward me without looking up. Judge Faulkner reviewed the withdrawal. He looked at both lawyers. He looked at me for a long time. Miss Lawson, he said, his voice carrying a weight that made the gallery straighten up. The court accepts the withdrawal of the custody petition. I'm also ordering a full forensic audit of Mr. Whitfield's financial disclosures, to be completed within 60 days, and I am referring the matter of the RESP withdrawals to the appropriate authorities for criminal investigation. He paused. I've been on this bench for 19 years. I have seen a great many people walk into this courtroom wearing masks. He looked directly at Gavin. It is always something when the mask comes off. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 plainclothes RCMP officers walked in. One of them was holding a document. They spoke quietly with Gavin's lawyer, who then whispered to Gavin. The blood left his face for the final time. It turned out the RCMP had used my documentation to obtain a production order for his banking records, which revealed not just the RESP fraud, but a pattern of income tax evasion stretching back 4 years. The total undeclared income exceeded $900,000. Combined with the RESP misappropriation and the perjury in his sworn financial statement, the charges were enough to make Cheryl excuse herself from the case on the spot. Gavin stood up slowly. He buttoned his blazer, that automatic muscle memory gesture of a man who still thought looking put together might save him. He walked toward the officers. As he passed me, he stopped. I built everything we had, he said. No, I replied. You spent everything I earned. There's a difference. He walked out between the 2 officers. Diane followed him into the hallway, heels clicking faster and faster. Tanya ran after them. Brett didn't move. He was staring at his phone like it held the answers to a test he'd already failed. Not a single person in that gallery said a word to me as I packed my things. Outside, the November air hit my face like cold water after a fever. Bay Street was doing what Bay Street always does, rushing, indifferent, alive. A streetcar rattled past. Someone honked. The city didn't care about what had just happened in courtroom 4B, and that was the most beautiful thing about it. I sat on a bench outside Osgood Hall, under the bare branches of a maple tree that had probably watched 1,000 people walk out of that building with their lives rearranged. I pulled out my phone and called my daughters. They were at my mother's house in Hamilton, eating grilled cheese and watching something loud on the iPad. Mommy, when are you coming home? My oldest asked. Soon, baby. I'm just finishing something. Did you win? I thought about it. Winning felt like the wrong word. Winning implies a game. This wasn't a game. This was a woman who had been underestimated by a man who mistook her silence for surrender, her frugality for failure, her patience for weakness. Yeah, I said. I think I did. That night, I drove back to the basement apartment in Scarborough. I heated soup on the hot plate. I sat on the floor with my laptop and finalized the paperwork to sell the Rosedale house my house, now to a family who'd been renting in the neighborhood for 6 years and never thought they'd be able to afford it. I gave them a fair price. Then I opened my phone, found Gavin's contact, and deleted it. Not blocked. Deleted. There's a difference. Blocking means you're still thinking about them. Deleting means they no longer exist in your architecture. I closed the laptop and looked around the apartment. The water stain on the ceiling, the draft from the window that no amount of plastic sheeting could fix, the pile of library books my youngest had arranged by color on the floor because we didn't have a bookshelf. I smiled. This apartment was never my prison. It was my war room, and the war was over. 3 months later, I moved the girls into a 3-bedroom house in Burlington with a backyard and a dog named Colonel Mustard. I started my own forensic accounting practice. My first client was a woman in Mississauga whose husband had hidden $2 million in cryptocurrency during their divorce. I found every coin. Gavin pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000, tax evasion, and perjury. His sentence was 4 years. Diane stopped speaking to me, which felt less like a loss and more like a gift I'd been waiting 7 years to receive. Tanya sent me a letter that began with, "I never knew," and ended with, "I'm sorry." I read it once and recycled it. Some nights, after the girls are asleep and the house is quiet and Colonel Mustard is snoring on the couch, I sit on the back porch and watch the sky over Lake Ontario turn purple. And I think about the woman I was in that courtroom. The woman who sat in silence while a man tried to erase her in front of a judge and a gallery full of people who had already decided she was nothing. She wasn't nothing. She was listening. She was counting. She was waiting. And when the moment came, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She opened a blue folder and ended a man's entire charade with paperwork and patience. Peace isn't something someone gives you. It's something you build, brick by brick, in a basement apartment with a broken stove, while the person who hurt you sleeps soundly in a house they stole from you, believing they've already won. The strongest thing I ever did wasn't confronting Gavin in court. It was the 18 months before that, when I chose silence over satisfaction, evidence over emotion, and strategy over revenge. Because revenge is loud, justice is quiet, and the quietest person in the room is almost always the most dangerous.